Hey guys, it's me Zain, and today we're gonna talk about orchids and when to expect blooms from our orchids. Okay, well this is a good question, right? So I thought let's make another basic orchid type question and answer video for those growers who are not just super experienced with their orchids. So I thought let's make a video about when to expect blooms from our orchids. As you might know, there are a lot of types of orchids, not only one. Not only the phalaenopsis orchid, which is the most popular orchid out there, we have a lot more common types of orchids which we can get in the garden centers and in grocery stores. I will go through all these common types of orchids and tell you when we can expect blooms from them, because there are some orchids which bloom according to the season, because these orchids are seasoned and they highly depend on the season, because they have a season, a period in which they have to bloom in order to get pollinated in the nature, and they have this trait also in our homes, so they are seasoned. Also, there are other types of orchids which aren't seasoned and they can bloom for us all year long. They can bloom in summer, winter, autumn, spring. They can bloom when they want to bloom and when they are ready to bloom. Reblooming orchids actually requires first a good care. We have to care for our orchid as best as we could and provide the proper temperatures, the proper water level, the proper light level, and if our orchid is healthy, in that case we can expect blooms. And if we expect blooms, we have to know a few rules and a few things about our orchids, and then we will know when we can expect a phalaenopsis orchid to bloom, when we can expect an oncidium to bloom. So let's talk about these most common types. So at first, let's talk about the most common type of orchid, the phalaenopsis orchid. Okay, so I have here this blooming phalaenopsis orchid which is called Ever Spring Prince, and I really like it. So this is a phalaenopsis orchid which is right now in bloom. Well, phalaenopsis orchids are those types of orchids which are actually seasoned orchids, and most phalaenopsis orchids which we can get in these grocery stores and these garden centers, so these complex hybrid phalaenopsis orchids which are not so close to those which are living in the wild, so the species orchids, well, these tend to bloom in the late winter or in the spring, and they can extend their blooming into the summer because they have a long blooming period. Why is that? Phalaenopsis orchids for blooming need a little, let's call it a trick. They need an average drop in the temperature, just a little bit, because you don't have to freeze them or something. They need this drop in temperature, and this drop in temperature actually will tell the orchid that, oh, I will have to bloom right now because my season is coming and the active season of my pollinator is coming, so I will start to produce a flower spike. Usually this happens in the autumn, because in our homes, in our gardens, colder temperatures approach us in the autumn, so that means that the spike will be grown throughout the autumn and in the winter, and in late winter and in spring we can expect our flower spikes on our phalaenopsis orchids to actually open their buds, and they will be blooming and they will start their blooming period in late winter or even in spring. But since phalaenopsis orchids have flowers which are super long lasting, they can last like 3 months or sometimes up to even more, because they have super long lasting flowers. That's one reason they are so popular. They can actually bloom for you throughout the spring and in the summertime as well. You can expect your phalaenopsis orchids to start growing a spike after a drop in temperature, and a few months after it will bloom, and it will bloom for a long time. So that's why actually they are blooming in the springtime. Of course they can bloom in other times. Of course we can have unseasoned plants from the garden centers, because in the garden centers we can find mostly blooming orchids, so sometimes they need a few years to actually find their proper season to bloom, because we can have some phalaenopsis orchids which just refuse to bloom in spring. But the basic rule for expecting blooms for our phalaenopsis orchids is in late winter and in spring. Okay, so the next very common type of orchid is the Dendrobium nobile, which has these long canes. They have leaves all along the canes, and they can have their flowers all along the cane. So they will have these flower spikes emerging from the actual those long canes. Once again, this orchid is a seasoned plant. They have a very distinct growth pattern because these nobiles are actually growing a lot in spring and in the summertime. They have to grow new bulbs and they have to mature these bulbs and they have to mature these new growths actually. And in the autumn time, as the temperatures are colder and colder and as we approach the winter time, they will have a resting period. It's not a dormancy, it's just a winter rest for this orchid, because in the winter rest with this colder temperature stuff and less water stuff, this is its trick to actually trick them to bloom, because like this we can mimic their natural habitat. These colder temperatures and less water will tell the plant that spring is coming and it's time to bloom. So the nobile orchids will bloom in the springtime. They have shorter blooming periods as the phalaenopsis orchids. This orchid is actually depending on the winter rest, and the winter rest is very important. So after the winter rest they will bloom in the springtime. So we can expect blooms on our Dendrobium nobile orchids in the springtime. Okay, the next very common type of orchid is again a dendrobium, but it's called Dendrobium phalaenopsis, which has nothing to do with the phalaenopsis orchids. It's not a cross or something between the two. It's a different type of dendrobium. These Dendrobium phalaenopsis orchids also have canes and the same leaves on the canes, but their growth pattern is a little different. The most different thing between the Dendrobium nobile and the phalaenopsis is that they don't need winter rest and they don't need less water, they don't need the colder temperatures. What they actually need, the growth to be matured, and after one growth is matured, well, they can bloom from the top of the cane. So they won't bloom all along the cane, they won't have spikes from all the sides of the cane. They will have a spike sprouting from the top. There can be only one spike, or there can be actually more spikes sprouting from the top of the newly matured cane. And after cane is matured, it will bloom if it's healthy. We can see a little bit seasoning with this plant. It's more prone to bloom in the warmer seasons. It's rather blooming in the spring, in the summer, in the autumn time than in the winter time, because in winter time everything is slowed down. They can actually bloom after a cane is matured. So this is the thing which is going on with Dendrobium phalaenopsis, which can actually resemble the Dendrobium nobile, but it's different. Okay, the next most common type, the cattleyas. Well, I have here this little mini cattleya which is called the Sophrolelio cattleya Little Hazel M, and I really like this plant because it has gorgeous tiny red blooms. I just love it. Well, with cattleyas the thing is there are a lot of different types of cattleyas out there. So the cattleyas in the wild, some can be seasoned and some can be unseasoned, but there are some cattleyas which, for example, will bloom only in the summer or only in the spring, only in the winter time. It really just depends. But these hybrid cattleyas, some can bloom all year long, while some can bloom only once a year. So it really depends on the cattleya which you have, because some cattleyas, as the growth is matured, a cane is produced and there is a leaf on the top of a cane. There can be more leaves. It is called the bifoliate cattleya. This is called the unifoliate cattleya. But after a growth is matured, we can expect a bloom for that growth. And there are more types of cattleyas. There are cattleyas which actually produce a sheath at the base of the leaf, and from that sheath can grow out the actual buds. But there are some types of cattleyas which is like this one. The new buds won't be produced after the full growth is matured, but it will produce some buds while the growth is still maturing. And as you can see, this is a new growth. As the leaf was split, we can see there are already the buds peeking through a tiny little sheet there. You have to experience what is your cattleya like and how is your cattleya growing, because with cattleyas you can experience like anything. Some cattleyas will bloom only once, some cattleyas actually bloom twice, or actually they can bloom a lot of times per year. because there are a lot of types of cattleyas. You just have to know what type of cattleya it is. Some cattleyas will only produce one pseudobulb per year, but some cattleyas can produce more pseudobulbs and more growth per year. So you just have to wait it out and see what your cattleya wants to do. Okay, the next common type of orchid is the oncidium orchid. And when I say oncidium orchid, in the garden centers we can find these complex hybrid oncidiums, which are actually not only from the genus Oncidium, but they are coming from more genera, and they are intergeneric hybrids because there are like the Oncidiums, Miltonias, or I cannot remember anything else right now. But the main idea is they can be actually intergeneric hybrids. And I have one example for that. This is a miniature Oncidium type with a lot of flower spikes right now. Oncidiums basically have these pseudobulbs. They grow pseudobulbs, and on the sides and on the top of the pseudobulb can be the leaves. This Oncidium is actually called the Hogara lava burst red bug. And well, yeah, we can see the reasoning behind that name. I really love these red tiny blooms. With Oncidium types and with all these intergeneric Oncidium types which we can find in the garden centers and these grocery stores, the thing is, they will bloom after they matured a pseudobulb. We can expect blooms from the Oncidium types after they started to grow a new growth. A new growth has to grow tall and then split with the leaves and stuff. And after we start to see the new pseudobulb, at that moment we can actually peek in between the leaves if there are new flower spikes growing somewhere. And this is the latest pseudobulb which was created, and after these leaves start to split out from each other, I could already see the flower spikes starting to grow. But if an Oncidium type produces and matures a new growth and there are new growth already produced by the plant, there is a high chance that that pseudobulb won't actually grow flower spikes. Also, when they mature a new growth, they can bloom. So without the season, they can bloom all year long. Okay, so the next, and I think that's the last most common type of orchid, is the vanda orchid. Huge leaves with bare roots just hanging down, those gorgeous beauties, one of my favorite orchids. They like warm temperatures, so I can safely say that their most ideal temperatures are in the summertime. They can enjoy also the spring and the autumn, but they will bloom in the warmest month of the year. So it's basically the summertime, but they can bloom also in the winter time if they get enough sun and the temperatures are also enough. So with the vandas, they can bloom more times a year. They can bloom also once per year. So with vandas, it's like the cattleyas, you just have to experience what is your vanda like. But these most common hybrids, I think the Vanda Pachara Delight, it can bloom more times per year. Also the Rhynchoridis Bangkok Sunset, it can produce blooms more times per year. So it's not like there's only one blooming period and that's that. Okay, so that was the topic which I wanted to talk about today, and I hope you find it useful. If you find it useful, please subscribe to this channel. Also, you can check out my other channel and you can follow me on Instagram, and you will find all the links down in the info box. And also like this video, leave a comment and share this video. And I don't know what else should I say, but I think that's all for now, and see you next time. Bye guys. And well, reblooming succulents what?